Welcome to this episode of In Conversation With. Here we are in February 2021, nearly a year into this pandemic, and we hope you're doing well. To call the last year one of humanity's most challenging in recent memory wouldn't be an understatement, and it has been more difficult and in some cases devastating for some of us. But it has also been an opportunity for us to reflect on some fundamental questions about meaning and purpose, both individually and as institutions. I've been very fortunate to have had many such conversations and have found them to be uplifting and inspiring. I'm absolutely delighted to share with you one such conversation I had in December 2020 with one of the leaders of the remanufacturing industry, David Fitzsimons. David is the director of the European Remanufacturing Council and has led the council since January 2017. The European Remanufacturing Council is based in Brussels and represents multiple business sectors and trade associations that extend the life of products through remanufacture and refurbishment. David represents the Council at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, with whom he led the Better Than You project. He is currently a member of the UN Working Group on Product Life Extension, a member of Technical Committee 323 for the forthcoming 59,000 series ISO standards for the circular economy, a member of the Advising Committee for the Product Lifetimes and the Environment or PLATE conference, and a member of the World Economic Forum Council for Advanced Manufacturing and Production. Please join me in welcoming David.
We have, by choice, whether or not there's wisdom to it is maybe a different discussion, created a system, a money system and an economic system that for a large part produces waste because it does not incentivize longevity in the way we create products. And perhaps, a potential point of reflection, at least I don't know this for sure, is that the right to repair movement is a manifestation of the inherent need and desire and aspiration of us as human beings to hold on to a sense of identity that comes from the past, which is often embodied with memory and meaning and relationship, what we call heirlooms, for example, but they don't necessarily have to be jewelry, for example, but any artifact or product or something that belong to a relative, that's something that we want to use through our life and then pass it on, by definition requires robust quality. To look at it from a more engineering perspective, perhaps, and I think we're missing that. I think we living in a system that enshrines using and throwing as soon as it reaches a certain point, which then results in producers doing that because that's what results in turnover, and looking at it from a purely financial and economic system. So we've designed an overall system that incentivizes the creation of waste. It's maybe not the intentional outcome, but it is the outcome regardless. And it will be great to hear your perspective on that. As is that right to repair movement one potential manifestation of a pushback against this use and throw mentality? And how do you see that kind of evolving and maturing into more formalized thinking and programs or initiatives like product scoring systems? I think there is kind of a evolution there, which intentionally we might not see that it has an organic nature to it, but it would be kind of lovely to hear how you see it and what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think it's a very interesting question. Is the right to repair movement, the success of the right to repair movement, a reflection of something deep in human need? And so I think with apologies to anthropologists and psychologists everywhere, because of, I'm bound to make some really horrific simplifications. Is that the case? And I think, given that humans are themselves, we're on a journey to death and to decay and death. There seems to be plenty of evidence that the anthropologists have found over the years that we try to resist that inevitable decline in ourselves by handing on something that preserves our memory. And maybe that's what the right to repair movement is getting into. That we have this need, this long need to show that we existed and we pass things on. So there's so much evidence of this, isn't there? From totem poles that are left, pyramids. The evidence is enormous. So what is it that we're trying to do? And I'm reminded of myself, just to make it a personal story, I'm reminded how when my own father died, he left a number of tools. And it gives me real sense of pride that I've still got this wonderful axe that he had. He didn't use it very much. He wasn't a lumberjack or anything, but it was a beautiful axe with a maple wood handle. And I know that he held it. And it's now, it must be, and I believe his own father held it before him. So it's probably over 100 years old now, in beautiful condition. And I feel a sense of obligation to pass that on in great condition to my son. My son doesn't know this yet, but he will be getting an axe in due course, which won't be a lot of use to him in Madrid, I don't think. At least I hope not. But there is something beautiful about having these memories passed on. And I think that's what we're all about. So does the right to repair movement, has its success got to that? And I'm sure the Journal of Consumer Research would be delighted to give us some more evidence in this area. But I think you're probably right. There's something going on there. And why is it important? Well, I've spent most of my career trying to create a policy environment and businesses responding to that environment where they make longer living products or they're extending the life of products. So maybe I should reflect on that myself, about what my own drivers are, about why I've done this. So your question is a very good one, I think, both generally and personally. So very good. And what has happened? Well, when you think about iFixit in the States, when they first started drawing attention to that so many products just seemed to be designed for a short life, they'd fall to pieces, they couldn't be repaired. And very quickly, people responded well to the iFixit movement. And now next year, so from January 2021, the French government is going to pick up those ideas from the right to repair movement and create what's called an indice de réparabilité. So a lot of products will be scored on their repairability. And some products will get 0 out of 10, others will get 10 out of 10. And it'd be interesting to see whether that label does then lead to people wishing to buy more long-lived or repairable products. So the evidence will be piling up from January of 2021, I think, Rajiv. So we'll see. There's the opportunity. And what's interesting as well is it's not just France that's doing this. There's the JRC in Seville are also developing a very similar scoring system for products across the whole of the single market for the EU. And I think that will come along in due course, unless the French system is a complete disaster, which I doubt. And it's, who is it? It's Christopher Spilotopoulos he's the head of the unit at the JRC in Seville in Spain, who's working on this scoring system for the whole EU. So what next? Well, I think, when people see that their products can be scored, it does lead to all sorts of things. You then know, you have the knowledge to say, this product is repairable. It can continue in life longer than these basically disposable single-use products that are everywhere now. And as you described it, just piling up as trash after a relatively short life. So where does that lead us to? Well,
just quickly, I think thank you. This is helpful. Broadly, the shift towards circularity and sustainability is going to require such kind of systemic change, fundamentally. One thing that I quickly wanted to reflect on was in countries like India, for example, repair is, in some ways, it's kind of almost the first step. It is often viewed as, obviously you're going to try and repair it. Not always, but certainly a very common, which is part of the cultural mindset to a certain extent. I don't necessarily want to speculate what drives that. I doubt there's one particular motivation. I think it's a combination of factors. It can range from scarcity to inaffordability to the broader aspect of actually holding on to something that is dear and precious and passing it on to the next generation or your children. And the other piece, and I think this is perhaps where you were also headed, is when you do have products that by design have repairability built into them, it opens the door to alternative modalities of life extension that are just not repair, but remanufacturing then becomes just much more doable. I think, and that's kind of one of the fundamental issues with high quality or just remanufacturing. The quality is always supposed to be the same as a new product, which is the ability to disassemble without destruction, to take things apart with ease, with minimal labor and effort and that kind of thing. But and those were a couple of things that sort of popped up for me, is that there's the repair, and it's interesting to also see how there's a difference in the way these movements emerge across different parts of the world. And they're not necessarily massive leaps either, right? So they're, to an extent, there's an incrementalism, but also an organic sense of, connecting back to that sense of identity and meaning, and holding on to things and valuing things and products that last for long periods of time. So I just want to kind of interject there, but yeah, please, I'd love to hear more about where you see this going as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think just a little example, because sometimes it's big products, small products, what are we talking about? Well, I think Carl Wiens, who started iFixit, I mean, he's worth catching if you get the opportunity to do so. I mean, I have a lot of time for the way he presents the ideas. He picked up recently on the way in which the Airpods, which lots of us are using at the moment, although these are wired. So an identical product, so the Airpods from Apple versus Samsung's Beans, they're both functionally identical. The difference is you can't even replace the battery in the Apple product, I'm sorry to say. So after a couple of years, you have to throw them away. And every 2 years, you're going to be doing this side, just buying them, throwing them away. Whereas the Samsung product, identical, but you can take them apart, replace the battery. So some designer decided, same product, let me just make it a little bit differently. The cost difference, tiny, but one will be going on for years, the other just keeps on being churned and thrown away. Now,
Yep.
so you might think all Apple products are terrible and all Samsung products are brilliant. No, that's not true. There are some really good Apple products that score 9s and 10s,
Yep.
and some Samsung products which are terrible. So,
Yep.
so what do you discover when you've got products that are scored accurately by someone that you trust? Well, it means that you've then, if it's got an 8, 9, 10, and you know it's repairable, you've also got entrepreneurs who are going to say, that's interesting to me too, because I could do that at a much bigger scale. That product I want back because I know that I can put it back into, give it a second life again. And maybe I do that in cooperation with the OEM that made it, or maybe I'll do it independently. Or we'll come to some kind of an arrangement where I'm contracted to do that and use some of their spare parts. But that opens up, that little bit of information opens up a whole new area of business that wasn't there before. And I'm hoping, we'll wait and see, but I'm hoping that the availability of trusted scoring data per product will open up these new opportunities for those who believe in repair, and most importantly, those who want to buy a product that is not just as good as new, but is better than new, because all the resources haven't had to be mined to make another one. And this new fetish that we seem to have collectively will be replaced by pride in the fact that you've got something that isn't brand new. In fact, it's better than new, and that excites me. I think that we might open up those possibilities, all because of this right to repair movement. Picking at something which, as you've said, maybe is really something fundamental there about what we value as humans, or are trying to value as humans. Let's hope so. And if it's more remanufacturing, obviously I'm happy. I'd be delighted to see more industrial scale remanufacturing, more repairable consumer products, as well as the industrial products where it already happens. Does that make, is that credible, do you think, Rajiv?
Yeah, I think so. I'm glad you kind of talked about it from the perspective of when you give a product a second or third life cycle or life, you're essentially eliminating the preceding steps, which would have been part of the life cycle had you built it up from virgin materials, which is the raw material extraction and all the impacts that come from it. And that also made me think about, you mentioned that the Airpods and the Apple Airpods and the Samsung Beans are very similar in cost. There doesn't seem to be much difference, but I think we also, as consumers, perhaps are quite, ultimately fixated on the cost in terms of what the purchasing price is, right? So our sense of utility and value. But when you kind of zoom out and look at it from a similar life cycle perspective, which is life cycle costing, the overall cost of something that can be given multiple life cycles across the board, which is to say perhaps the mitigation costs that would have occurred had you produced it from virgin materials are gone. And so we don't think about the impact beyond the cost impact in particular. We don't think about it beyond the point of purchase, but you're essentially, that's just kind of a drop in the totality of what it costs to society for producing something that ultimately ends up as waste, which requires a massive infrastructure, and the embedded labor, embedded energy, all of that essentially just ends up potentially in a landfill or getting burnt off, as opposed to being given a fair shake at providing the same utility over and over again. I think, if you want to slice it and look at it purely from a financial perspective, that this is sometimes, or maybe often, overlooked, is what's the life cycle implication of product A versus product B, from a total cost accounting perspective, which accounts for all the unintended consequences, which are in sustainability speak are called negative externalities, which is essentially what you didn't think would happen, didn't know would happen, but happened anyway. What happened wasn't good, and now somebody's got to pay to fix that, right? So I think this is, to me, it sort of broadly also ties into, coming back to the sense of, our shared humanity or values. I think the other piece that this speaks to, for me at least, is a sense of stewardship, that we're stewards of the resources that we have, and not just users and exploiters. And nobody really wants to be that. I think if you were to ask the question, a sense of guardianship and stewardship somehow feels much more resonant and true, as opposed to, it's just stuff and I don't care about it. And yeah, some people probably do think that way, and that's okay. But I think it's okay in that you can't enforce that or force that thinking onto somebody else. But also, I think when we peel back the layers and look at it, like you mentioned at the beginning, from the perspective of the finality of human life in particular, that certainly emerges quite strongly, as I don't want to make a mess while I'm here. I certainly don't want to. We're doing it because of the way things are set up right now, and that's not putting blame elsewhere. Some things are systemic and require systemic solutions, and often we don't know that we're part of that causal chain. So
yes, your use of the word guardianship or stewardship, very important there, I think, because I think you and I as individuals may wish to be true to that concept, but it's extremely difficult to be able to do that, to take the actions necessary to be consistent with those aims. You need to work with a network of others who you trust to be able to do that. And so that trust relationship with the people that you buy from and trade with is what I think businesses are trying to say to their customers. You can trust us to do that. And let me just give you a tangible example, because we're speaking together with the wonders of technology. Me in Brussels, you in New Delhi, and
I'm in Mumbai, but close enough.
But my apologies, I completely missed that. Mumbai to Brussels, and via a whole load of technology along the way. But sitting in front of me is a device that's enabling that. And I know that embedded in that device are some critical raw materials which have an economic value of about 3 euro cents, maybe 4 euro cents. And they have been mined from the earth and refined, and very, very small quantities of them used to alloy into this piece of equipment to make it functional. And when this machine has come to the end of its days, it will be smashed up, and material recycling will be the way for it to go. And those critical raw materials, tiny quantities, will get lost in the ferrous and non-ferrous streams. And that they'll get used in rebar, in concrete, perhaps the next car that you buy. But what has happened is that those critical raw materials that once were in the Earth's crust will have been distributed even further in those two streams, ferrous, non-ferrous, will be completely inaccessible to our children, our children's children. But we will have done that. We will have accelerated entropy for the use of our pieces of equipment for 4 or 5 years. And I think that's alarming, really, that we think ourselves that that's perfectly acceptable, that we just don't wish to be concerned with that accelerated entropy for materials that are very valuable into humanity, but don't have an economic value for this piece of equipment in front of me.
Right.
And we can't really intervene, can we, Rajiv? How are we going to change 3-4 euro cents into enough that, that the materials will be recovered? I don't think so. Which is why I come back to saying you need to find a way of extending the life of the components and products for longer than a 5-year life cycle or 3-year life cycle. And the best work I've seen on that has been done by TU Delft. TU Delft and Dave Peck at TU Delft has been very impressive in the work they've done there. And also, I would also say, as I've criticized Apple in our conversation, Apple did some really good work on asking the same question, because they make 1 billion products a year. Yeah. And when it comes to stewardship, they're tiny quantities of critical raw materials per product. When you multiply by 1 billion, is a lot of material. And they recognize that, and I think are struggling with what are they going to do about it to be sustainable as an organization in the future. Whereas you and I talk about it intellectually and as consumers, but we want people like Apple to think on our behalf, what are they going to do? And if they crack it, if they do something that's convincing, you and I are going to do business with them, aren't we?
Right.
We'll say, thank you, you're part of our trusted network to make us, to have those words that you use, stewardship, guardianship, mean something other than words on a page in a book or a conversation like this.
Yes. You're also making me think about this issue of closing the loop. So if we've done the work to mentally, emotionally, perhaps even spiritually orient ourselves towards this sense of stewardship and guardianship, and that we want to take full ownership and responsibility for all the gifts that really we have, what we, in a deadened way call natural resources, but it's all part of a living, breathing planet. It's going to require a rewiring or a re-engineering of the way our industrial economy fundamentally functions. And the gap is what we call perhaps the waste management industry, which really should be the resource stewardship, resource guardianship, resource recovery, harness, and reuse industry in a way. And there are some loops that enable that in an organic fashion. But what I'm getting to is, I could be wrong, but maybe you could shed some light on this with some of the movement that's happening in Europe. My sense is that there's a huge disparity between the amount of research and work done to produce products versus the amount of research, technology, and effort put into the recovery of materials from products at the end of their lives, right? Using the example of very small amounts of what I'm guessing you meant are conflict minerals in electronic products, which in a maybe unsophisticated waste management or recovery system is almost impossible to economically or sensibly harness, to pull out from large quantities of ferrous or non-ferrous materials. So I just wonder, are you seeing more resources or a shift towards greater use of technology, greater investment in research to complete that loop so that it is just as sophisticated and just as or thinks of materials in just as valued a way as we do when we're extracting them from the earth? And there's so much precision about it in terms of quality and purity. Where do things stand from an infrastructure, if that's the right word or not, I'm not sure, but from that, the closing the loop, the reverse supply chain. And my sense is that more needs to be done there to really make it robust and to be able to recover materials as much as possible. But I wondered if you had any thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, when I started my career in this area of the circular economy, it was at that final stage where companies like Suez and Veolia scaled themselves up to become more skilled, able to put more money into the investments required to sort out the mess that's left at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But I've left that behind, in that I think that it's the priority is first to extend the life of products, to design products in such a way that there's a cascaded use for as long as possible, to bring them back and add value to them again. And I like the ideas of product value retention for as long as possible, and product life extension, those two terms. And obviously from remanufacturing point of view.
Yeah.
But of course, inevitably, we do end up with a whole lot of junk products that need to be managed. And that's then when the waste management industry has got its task. As a company here in Belgium called Umicore, who are about as good as it gets when it comes to finding, re-refining the metals that are left over from our lives. So I think there is a lot to be done there. You're quite right. There's still a lot to be done to make it as precise and as well engineered as our work at the start of the value added process for materials and products. So a lot to be done at that end still. But for me, priority one is still not to fool ourselves into thinking that a high recycling rate is something to celebrate, because we've been doing that for 25 years and the atmosphere doesn't seem to have noticed. The level of CO2 in the atmosphere has been going up steadily throughout my life. And regardless of what policies we've had for recycling, the recycling rate's gone up, but so has the CO2 in the atmosphere, because our product lives, I think, have become shorter, more complex products. And so we've just got a lot of activity going on, producing more and more products that are shorter life, ending up with a heap of junk at the end. Yep. That's what we have to break, in my view. That's the principal change that we need. And that's why I think your questions are particularly interesting. There are all sorts of technical issues in there. How do you do it? What policies? But are we pushing at something that's at a human need, that humans will respond to if the right language could be used to say, this is what we're doing. This is, and so we're making the right appeal to the heart and the head. Yeah. And I think so far we haven't. That's why I'm enjoying this conversation, Rajiv. I think what you're bringing to it is there's something deeper and more spiritual about this work. It's not just a technical question about making things last longer. Hopefully there's a human need that we're responding to as well. But we're all struggling, aren't we? We haven't quite got the language right. We're not borrowing from the right thinkers. We know that there's the psychologists out there who the marketing people are always using. We know there are anthropologists who have done all this work in the past, whether it's Levi Strauss or I'll tell you what came to mind is in The Grapes of Wrath, there's a wonderful quote. John Steinbeck, he says, yes. How will we know it's us without our past? I think that's fantastic. How will we know it's us without our past? And we've become this society where we just crush through consumer stuff. Rush. It's got to be new. Get through. Yeah. Chuck it away. Get another new thing. And thereby we're also just saying, forget where we've come from. And I think that's where we've got it as an essence of what you've been talking about today, that we could just dig a bit deeper and bring other thinkers to this conversation. And I think the language would change, and maybe we'd respond to that human need better in the way that the right to repair movement, I think, maybe accidentally put its finger and got it right.
Yeah, with things like the product scoring systems, is just to kind of take a step back and look at it a little bit more from a systems perspective. You know, that not only provides users as well as the producers, the designers, a common framework of judgment, but then it also, as more of us tether to this desire for, you know, extending life of products and retaining it for meaning or for utility, it's going to force a shift in the design community fundamentally, because if nobody wants to buy things that generate waste, you're going to have to rethink the way you're creating products at the most fundamental level. And so I think that's my sense of optimism is in many ways renewed, especially because of the way we've adapted in the last year with so many changes that have occurred. We are capable of that. We were cornered into it, but I don't think we have to wait. We don't have to be forced into it. We're certainly capable of fast and sensible adaptation.
Well, look, I'm with you on the view of the future. I too, and I'm an optimist entirely about. We're walking with a big stone in our shoe, and eventually, you know, you might be in a hurry. You'll keep on walking with the stone in the shoe, but eventually you'll just say, "Hey, I might be in a hurry, but I'm going to stop and sort this out." And I think that's roughly where we are. We have noticed the discomfort. And I think the reason I'm optimistic is I'm a member of the World Economic Forum Council for Manufacture and Production. And the people that I see from big businesses talking about these issues, they're much younger than me, they're much smarter than me, but the conversations that they're having are, I think, about right. They sense the responsibility, they sense the possibilities, and they know they've got the tools. Somebody just needs to say, let's get these lined up to deliver something much better. This reset discussion that they're having, I think, is absolutely right. And Charles Schwab at the World Economic Forum, he gets my vote. I think he's got the gentleness, the foresight, and I think the drive for change. So that's what makes me optimistic as well. So I'm glad we share that between us, Rajiv, that the world will get better. We've just got to keep on continuing, stick with it, perseverance.
Yes. And I also, you know, as we're coming to the close of 2020, and maybe, you know, symbolically also maybe the end of this particular conversation, I think it feels good to think about the next year and the future through that lens, that it's not, you know, it's not all doom and gloom as maybe reading a lot of the news might, you know, lead us to believe. But there are these shifts and movements and conversations that are occurring, that people are engaging this from a humanistic, perhaps existential, perhaps spiritual point of view of stewardship and kindredness. And there's, you know, I don't think there's anything at any given point there's a silver bullet of sorts. I think it's sort of like a fabric, and it evolves, and you're right. I think we keep at it, and, you know, we're likely to make mistakes, but I think drawing on our ability for humility and learning, you know, that's still a step forward, even with those mistakes. Those are important feedback. So I am curious in a way to see how this conversation will be received. I think part of what I found what drew me into this conversation, and it was wonderful to see that it was reflected back in your enthusiasm as well. You felt there was a resonance there. Was I completely lost my train of thought there.
No, I think
I'm so sorry.
I think where you started from was exactly right, and that is,
Yeah.
we were going to talk about the right to repair movement
Right.
and what it meant,
Right.
but you went. I love the way you went the other way. You turned it around and said, "Okay, we can look in that direction. Where is it going? But how about if we turn around and look back and ask, well, where has it come from, and why has it been so successful?" And it's interesting, in all the developed economies around the world, the right to repair movement has just mushroomed. It's really done well. So it's not just some catchy title. There is something deeper, which is what you were asking, and that's what drew me to you. I thought, now that's someone I want to have a fireside chat with, because it's a far better question than the one that I started with. Where is it going? And Rajiv, to say, no, where's it come from? Much better. And I think I've learned a lot from you asking that question. There's a lot of knowledge, as I said before, about from the anthropology sector, the psychology sector, where we don't typically draw on it, but we should, and certainly religious movements as well. Just look at where the ideas have come from that drive the way we behave now. And I'm currently reading Tom Holland's book called Dominion, about where Christian thought has come from. And it's a revelation, genuinely a revelation, to look back at how ideas became established and brought with it what's now the Western mind, which is essentially a Christian Western mind. But where did those ideas come from? And sometimes they were borrowed from the most bizarre places, from individuals who were very forceful, but then it got bound in, and we just talk about it now as if it's normal, but it wasn't normal once. So I love that kind of, let's investigate the roots, which is what we've done here. And when you do, maybe it does. That's the reason for our optimism. That if we are appealing to something a basic need in humankind, then we will be successful in the end. People will say that I want more of that. Thank you very much. It makes me feel better, even if I don't quite know why I'm feeling better. So if that means there's going to be more remanufacturing in the future, more care for our products, a greater respect for the resources that we have on the planet, then I'm a much happier man at looking at Christmas 2020 than I might otherwise have been.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that, Rajiv.
Yes. Thank you for taking the time. And for those listening, I'd love, and this is where I lost my train of thought a little bit. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what your thoughts or reflections are, and whether you think we're on the right track or we're completely off the deep end. But I think that kind of feedback is useful, and maybe that provides fodder for conversations going forward. To be inclusive in the way others are perceiving this, and even help us figure out what some of our own blind spots might be. So we certainly welcome that.